Wyoming Territory, 1879. The sun was still rising when Kenzie Fairburn drove a spade into the rocky earth and started digging her husband's grave. The wind cut low across the scrubland, lifting her black skirts as she pressed the boothiel down and worked the shovel with both hands. Her palms burned. Her arms ached, but she kept digging. The townsfolk of Dry River stood a good distance off, some whispering, most watching with wide eyes. A few laughed behind hands or tilted hats. A woman digging her own husband's grave, it was not done. But Kenzie had stopped waiting for men to do what needed doing a long time ago. She had buried a baby once. Then two more. Then her husband left for Cheyenne with another woman, only to come back a year later shot through the gut and dying slow. No preacher came. No one offered help, so she dug. "Look at her," someone muttered. "She's lost her mind." "She's always been strange," another said. "Should have left with her man when she had the chance." Kenzie heard all of it. She just did not care anymore. By the time the ground gave way deep enough, her sleeves were soaked with sweat and dirt caked the hem of her dress. She stood over the grave and stared down at it, her breath ragged. "You sure that is where you want him?" a voice called from behind. Kenzie turned. He sat tall in the saddle, a stranger with dusty boots, a wide-brimmed hat low over sharp eyes, and a rifle slung across his back. The horse beneath him was a lean sorrel. His shirt clung to his chest, and his jaw was rough with stubble. Something about the way he looked at her calm, steady, not sorry made her straighten. "Unless you know a better place," she said flatly. He dismounted. "I might." He walked toward her with slow, deliberate steps. "Name's Trute Vaughn. I passed through town looking for someone, saw the crowd." "Saw you?" Kenzie did not offer her name. She just looked at him, waiting. He glanced at the grave. "Looks like you did not wait for help." There was no help. Trute took off his hat, wiped the sweat from his brow, and looked down into the pit. "You do all this alone?" No one else seemed willing. He nodded once. "That right." Then he turned to the crowd and raised his voice. "You all got nothing better to do than gawk at a woman burying a man by herself." The townsfolk shifted, some looking away. A few wandered off, embarrassed. Kenzie blinked. "You did not have to do that." Seemed like someone should. He looked at her again. "You got any family?" "Not anymore." "You got kids?" "No," she said, then hesitated. "I did. They died before they learned to walk." Trute's eyes softened. He said nothing for a long moment, then picked up the shovel from where she had dropped it. "What are you doing?" she asked. "Helping you finish what needs finishing." Kenzie watched him work, silent. His shoulders flexed with each motion, and he worked without complaint, the way someone used to hard things did. By the time the grave was done proper, the sun was high and the crowd had gone. Together, they lowered the shrouded body into the ground. There was no sermon, no words. Just dirt and silence. When it was done, Kenzie turned toward her cabin on the edge of town. Trute followed, not asking, just walking beside her. Inside, the house was quiet, sparsely kept. Clean, but without warmth. A single chair by the fire. A cold stove. A wooden cradle pushed into the corner, empty. "You been alone long?" he asked gently. "Too long." He rubbed the back of his neck. "I did not mean to intrude. Just figured no one should have to do that by themselves." She looked at him, really looked at him for the first time. He had a scar on his left temple, a healed burn on one wrist, and eyes that had seen too much just like hers. "You hungry?" she asked. He nodded. "Yes, ma'am." That night they ate beans and cornbread in the quiet. He sat across from her at the table, his long legs stretched out, his fingers tapping the rim of his tin cup. She poured coffee. He drank it slow. "You said you were looking for someone," she said. "My brother," he replied. "Took off last year. Word is he joined up with a gang out near Laramie. I've been following trails since spring." "Why?" "He stole from me, took the last of what I had and left me with a debt to settle. I aim to find him, not for revenge, just to end it." Kenzie nodded. "You staying long?" "Just the night, then I ride." She stood and took his cup. He reached out and touched her wrist. It was not bold, just a quiet touch. She looked down at his hand. "You should not have to do everything alone," he said. "I've gotten used to it." He let go. "That does not make it right." That night, she lay in her bed and stared at the ceiling. Every few hours, the wind howled through the shutters. In the next room, she heard the creak of the floorboards as Troot shifted on the cot. He did not snore. He breathed steady. Morning came with rain. Steady, soaking rain. She found him already outside, hauling firewood from the lean-to to the porch. "You do not have to do that," she said. "I know." He stacked it neatly, then looked at her. "I was going to ride out today," she nodded. "I figured. But I saw something last night, the grave, the cradle, the quiet. And I do not feel right leaving yet." Kenzie folded her arms. "Why?" "Because you are still digging graves you should not have to." She stared at him for a long second, then opened the door and stepped inside. He followed. They spent that day hauling water, patching the roof, and fixing the fence line. They said little, but when she handed him tools, their fingers brushed. When he stood on the ladder, she held it steady. When he climbed down, she did not move away. That night, they sat by the fire. She told him about the babies, each one lost before their first steps. He told her about a father who drank too much and a mother who ran off when he was 10. They did not cry. They just shared pieces of themselves like trade. "You ever think about leaving?" he asked. "Every day," she said. "But there is nowhere to go." He looked at her like he wanted to say more, but something held him back. Then came the knock. Hard, sharp, unkind. Kenzie opened the door and stared into the wet face of Buck Granger, a local rancher with too much land and not enough manners. "You got no man now," Buck said, looking past her into the cabin. "That means this place is mine now. Your husband owed me $50 and I aim to collect." "He never told me that," Kenzie said. "He would not have, but it is true. I got the note right here." Troot stood behind her. "You got a lot of nerve showing up here with a lie." Buck narrowed his eyes. "Who are you?" "Someone you do not want to cross." Buck's hand went to his belt. Troot's hand was faster. The two stared at each other for a long second. Then Buck stepped back, gritted his teeth, and spat into the mud. "This is not over." "Yes, it is," Troot said as he shut the door. Kenzie locked it behind him, her hands shaking. "You all right?" he asked. She nodded. After a moment, she looked up at him. "Thank you." He stepped closer. "You do not need to thank me." "I was not about to let him take what you have left." Their eyes locked. Neither moved. Then, slowly, she reached for his hand. And this time, he did not let go. By the next morning, the rain had passed, leaving behind a sky stretched pale and clear over the ridgeline. The earth gave underfoot, soft with moisture. Troot took a hatchet to the dead cottonwood out back, its trunk split from a lightning strike weeks before. Kenzie watched from the window a long while before stepping outside. "You plan to cut the whole thing yourself?" she asked, arms folded against the early chill. "Figured I might as well," he said, wedging a boot against the base. "Firewood'll be worth something come winter." She leaned against the porch post. "You always take care of other people's winters." "I don't see the harm in it." He kept working. The sound of the blade against wood fell into a rhythm, steady and slow. She watched his hands, the way they moved with purpose, not hurry. There was a kind of quiet patience in him. She hadn't expected something that didn't need explaining. After a while, she said, "Buck's not the first man to try and stake a claim he didn't earn, but he's the boldest to come to the door." Troot paused, wiped his brow with the back of his wrist. "He come around often. Not before yesterday, but he'll be back. You want me gone before then?" "That's not what I said." He looked up at her. "What are you saying?" She stepped down from the porch, walked until they stood only a few feet apart. "I'm saying it's been a long time since anyone stayed long enough to ask." That night, a wagon came down the north trail, iron wheels groaning over the ruts. A boy no older than 12 sat atop the bench, reins in his lap, eyes too tired for someone that young. Behind him, a woman sat with her head bent low, wrapped in a shawl too thin for the wind. Kenzie met them at the gate. "You lost." The woman lifted her face. and Kenzie recognized her Mara Dobbins, who'd lived 3 ranches east before her husband took a bullet in the basin last fall. "We heard there was work," Mara said. "There isn't," Kenzie answered, glancing toward Trute, who stood now in the barn doorway. "We'll keep moving then." Kenzie touched the wagon's side. "You'll freeze before nightfall." Mara didn't argue, just looked down at her hands. Trute stepped forward. "There's space in the barn. You can stable here for the night." Mara hesitated. Then she nodded. "Thank you." Inside the house, after the boy had been given bread and a blanket and the woman a place near the stove, Kenzie poured water into the basin and handed Trute a cloth. "She's not eating," Kenzie said low. "She's not asking either. She's proud." "So are you." Kenzie turned. "That's different." "Is it?" They didn't speak again until the fire had burned low. The next morning, Mara offered her hands for work. Together, the 3 of them pulled weeds from the back plot and chopped the last of the squash from the dying vines. The boy, Sam, stood sentry on the porch, whittling a piece of soft pine with a penknife too small for his hand. "Your man," Mara said, glancing toward Trute, who knelt in the dirt nearby. "He from around here. He's just passing through." Mara looked sidelong at her. "That right." Kenzie stood, brushed the soil from her palms. "What are you asking?" "I'm asking if he's staying through choice or pity." Kenzie didn't answer. She didn't have to. That night, after supper, Trute sat on the porch step while Kenzie brought out warm bread wrapped in cloth. She handed him a piece without speaking. He took it, careful not to touch her fingers. "You always feed strangers?" he asked. "No, just the ones who split wood and fix fences." He smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "I keep thinking about Buck," she said after a while. "Men like him don't take no as a final word. I've dealt with men like him before." She looked at him carefully. "What did you do?" "I made sure they didn't come back." The wind picked up across the flats, carrying the scent of sage. Kenzie tucked her hands beneath her arms. "I thought I'd feel safer after the funeral," she said. "I thought burying him would settle something. But it didn't." "No." Trute leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "You ever think about selling this place? Starting somewhere that don't carry so much memory?" "I thought about it." "What stopped you?" She looked out across the dark land, the barn barely visible in the starlight. "I don't want to run. I want to stay and make it mine." He nodded once, slow. "That's a hard kind of brave." Kenzie turned to him. "You've seen what's left of me. It's not much." He met her eyes. "It's more than most have." The next day, Trute rode into town, said he needed to check on a trail rumor. Kenzie watched him disappear down the ridge, the wind curling dust behind his horse like smoke. He didn't return that night, or the next. On the 3rd morning, Kenzie rose before dawn, the barn quiet, the house colder without him. Mara offered her coffee in silence, and Sam took to the chores without being told. By midday, Kenzie saddled her mule and rode toward the dry creek bed west of town. She didn't explain herself. She just left. She found him near the edge of the gulch, horse tied to a juniper, shirt stained with blood that wasn't his. He wasn't moving. "Trute," she said, sliding off the mule. "I was coming back," he said, teeth clenched. "Didn't make it far." "What happened?" "Ran into Buck. He brought 2 men. Thought I'd be easy to take down." She knelt beside him, pressed a hand to his ribs. "You're not bleeding bad. They won't be back." She looked at his face. Something in it had gone soft, like he'd let down something heavy that had been on him too long. "I came looking," she said. "I hoped you would." She brought him home that night. Mara helped him to the cot. Sam stood in the doorway with wide eyes but didn't ask questions. Later, after the house had gone quiet, Kenzie sat beside him, damp cloth in hand. "I don't want to lose this," she said. "You won't." He reached for her hand, and this time she let him hold it without fear, without hesitation. "You filled that grave," she said. "Not just with dirt, with something I didn't think I'd have again." He didn't speak. He just brought her hand to his chest and held it there, over the steady beat of his heart. And in the quiet, it was enough. The last of the frost held in the ground longer than expected. But the mornings were softening, and with them, something in Kenzie that she hadn't felt in years. She woke earlier now, not from worry, but from a quiet sense of purpose. There was always something to tend a broken hinge on the chicken coop, a kettle to mend, a boy to fuss at for leaving his boots in the rain. And now there was Trute. He moved slower than usual, still stiff from the knife wound just beneath his ribs, but he didn't rest unless she forced him to. By late March, he was upright and walking the fence line again, favoring one side but steady. Kenzie caught up to him where the field sloped west, toward the dry basin. He was hammering a new crossbeam into place, shirt sleeves rolled up, the sun darkening the skin on his arms. "You've got no sense," she said, taking the hammer from him before he could argue. "You're still healing, and this post isn't going anywhere today." He leaned back against the rail, brushing sawdust from his shirt. "I'm no good sitting around. You're also no good if you tear the stitches open again. I didn't know you were inclined to worry." She handed him the canteen. "Only about things worth keeping." He drank without a word, then passed it back. "Mara and the boy planning to stay long, she hasn't said, but she's mending well. I think she's scared to hope for more than a few days at a time. She's not the only one." Kenzie watched the horizon, where the sage was just beginning to green. "I used to think if I didn't hold too tight to anything, I couldn't lose it. And now, I'm tired of empty hands." Trute didn't speak, but his gaze lingered on her mouth, then her throat, like he was memorizing the shape of things he hadn't dared touch yet. That afternoon, Mara stood at the stove, stirring a pot of onions down to butter. The boy was outside, tossing rocks at a rusted barrel. Kenzie peeled potatoes at the table. Trute sat across from her, polishing the stock of the rifle he'd brought from town. Mara glanced over. "You were a lawman once." "I wore a badge for a time," he said. "Didn't suit me." "Why not?" "I was too good at hurting people, not good enough at helping them." Mara stirred slower. "You think it's different now? I'm trying to be." Kenzie didn't look up from the paring knife. "You've done more good here in 3 weeks than most men do in a lifetime." Trute met her eyes, and something in them held steady, not fire, not heat, but the kind of warmth that didn't burn out. After supper, Mara took the boy out to the barn, giving them space without asking. The fire was low, casting long light across the floorboards. Kenzie folded a quilt in the corner, careful with her hands. "I heard you talking to Mara," she said. "You didn't tell me you wore a badge. I didn't think it mattered." "It does," she said, "not because of the job. Because of who you walked away from when it stopped mattering." He stood, slow, and crossed to where she stood. "You want all of it. I want what's real." He touched her cheek with the back of his hand, rough from work. "My brother's dead. I never said it outright, but it's true. I found him last autumn in a ditch outside Fort McKinney, shot clean through. Took me months to believe it wasn't my fault." She didn't flinch. "And now, I'm tired of running from ghosts. You taught me that without saying a word." She reached for his hand. "And you taught me not all good things are gone." His thumb brushed the curve of her wrist, slow and reverent. Outside, wind moved through the grass like a whisper, but the house held still. "I want to stay," he said. She didn't answer with words. She moved close and leaned into him, her forehead against his chest, and he wrapped his arms around her like he'd done it all his life. In the days that followed, the land began to green. Calves were born early, and Mara started tending a patch of herbs along the south wall. Sam helped Trute raise a new paddock, his hands calloused before spring was half over. Kenzie sat on the porch in the evenings, her mending in her lap, while Trute read aloud from an old almanac he found in the trunk out back. He wasn't much for poetry, but he liked the weather predictions and the planting charts. One evening, as the sun dipped low, he closed the book and looked at her. "You think you'll ever leave this place? Not anymore. You think you'll ever let yourself be happy? I already am." He reached out and took her hand, their fingers laced without ceremony. "We'll build something here," he said, "not fast, but solid." She nodded. "That's the only kind worth building." And then they sat in the quiet, the light fading between them, knowing that what they had wasn't loud or sudden or born of desperation. It had grown slow, under hard skies and long nights, and it would hold. By early May, the wind no longer carried ice through the cottonwoods, and the creek behind the paddock began to run again. Kenzie stood knee-deep in the garden rows one morning, folding compost into the soil with her bare hands, when Troot came from the barn with a length of rope and a letter folded into his vest pocket. He waited until she straightened. "There's a rider coming from Buffalo, law office. Said they want to speak with you." Her fingers stilled in the dirt. "About what?" They wouldn't say much, just that your name was listed in a probate matter. Someone left something behind. She brushed her hands clean on her apron. "I don't know anyone in Buffalo. You want me to ride in with you?" She shook her head. "If they're lying, I'll know soon enough." He didn't press her. But when she left at dawn the next day, Troot stood at the edge of the gate, hand resting on the post, eyes following her until she was out of sight. The road east was long and rutted, with hawks circling above and wagon tracks half washed out from spring melt. By the time Kenzie reached the outskirts of Buffalo, her back ached from the saddle and her mouth was dry. She found the law office tucked between a boarded-up mercantile and a dusty feed store, its sign crooked from the wind. Inside, a clerk with an ink-stained cuff handed her a paper. "Your name's on this deed, ma'am. Transferred from a Joseph Harlan past 3 months back, left a parcel of land and a cabin near the Bighorns." She stared at the document. "I don't know a Joseph Harlan." "He named you specifically, said you'd been owed far too long." Her stomach turned. "Was he a tall man, left-handed, walked with a limp?" The clerk nodded. "That's him." Kenzie exhaled, slow and deep. "He was my uncle, my mother's brother. I hadn't seen him since I was a girl. Left no other heirs." "Looks like he meant for this to find you eventually." She folded the paper carefully. "I don't want it." The clerk raised his brows. "It's good land." "I have land." Back in Dry River by nightfall, she found Troot sitting on the porch rail, sharpening a carving blade. He stood when he saw her. "Well," she handed him the deed. "A man I barely knew left me something. I told them I didn't want it." He read the fine print, then folded it without asking questions. "You sure?" "I've already put my roots down." Troot slipped the paper into his coat. "Then we'll consider it closed." That night, after the fire had burned to coals, Kenzie stepped outside alone. The moon hung low and wide over the hills, casting light across the yard. She stood barefoot in the grass, eyes on the barn where Sam's lantern flickered behind the slats. Troot came up behind her, quiet. "You thinking about leaving after all?" "I was thinking how strange it is, being wanted by someone you hardly remember, and how right it feels to be needed by someone who never asked for anything." He placed his hands on her shoulders, grounding her. "You've been needed longer than you know." She turned. "You ever think about what kind of man you'd have been if you hadn't lost so much?" "No, I think about the man I am now. And how he finally found a place that doesn't feel like punishment." She let her forehead rest against his chest, her breath feathering through the linen of his shirt. "I don't want to wait anymore." "You don't have to." Inside, Mara hummed while stitching seams by lamplight. The boy slept on a cot by the hearth, one hand curled around the dog-eared book Troot had given him last week. The house felt full, but not crowded. Lived in, but not worn. Come morning, the whole place smelled of yeast bread and damp wood. Troot came in from the barn with his hair wet from the trough, a shirt slung over one shoulder. Kenzie turned from the stove. "You always this slow in the morning?" "I was giving the horses time to wake. You know how they get." She handed him a tin cup. "You're stalling." He drank, then leaned against the counter. "I've been thinking. God help us." He smiled into his coffee. "I was thinking, if you're willing, I might ask the blacksmith in town to make up a pair of rings." Kenzie stilled. He raised his eyes to hers. "Nothing fancy. Just something that says I'm not walking away. Not next week, not next winter." She stepped closer, her hand resting on his chest. You waited until I had no doubts left. I wanted to be sure you weren't saying yes out of gratitude. I'm saying yes because I want to wake up in this house with your boots by the door and your coat on the hook and your voice in the next room." He held her hand with both of his. "Then we'll make it official. No preacher needed. Just the land, the quiet, and the two of us." Outside, the wind stirred through the grass, lifting the first white blossoms from the wild plum trees. Kenzie looked out past the fence line, past the ridge, past everything she'd once buried. "I never thought my peace would come walking up a dirt road with a rifle and a quiet kind of patience," she said. Trute kissed her knuckles, slow and steady. "I never thought mine would smell like cornbread and hold a shovel like she meant it." And when they stood there in the stillness, the morning warm and rising, there was no doubt left in either of them. They had filled the grave, closed the past behind it, and built something new in its place. Something that would hold. The wedding was held beneath the cottonwoods behind the house, where the light filtered soft through new leaves, and the ground held just enough give to feel alive underfoot. Kenzie wore her mother's brooch at her collarbone, the blue stone dulled with age but still catching light like it remembered brighter times. Trute stood beside her in a freshly washed shirt, his hair trimmed close by Mara's careful hand, boots polished in quiet reverence to the day. There was no preacher, no book of vows. Just the wind and the sound of Sam shifting his weight beside the fence, watching with arms crossed and jaw set like he wasn't sure whether to grin or not. "You ready?" Trute asked, voice low. Kenzie nodded. "I've never been readier for anything." He slipped the ring onto her finger, a band of smooth iron, shaped by the blacksmith's apprentice, who'd asked no questions and taken no payment. She returned the gesture, her hands steady. No one clapped, no one cheered. But the hush that followed was full and deep, like the land itself had decided they belonged to each other now. Afterward, they ate roast chicken and baked beans under the open sky. Mara had baked a pie apple, with a crust so flaky it barely held its shape, and Sam brought out a fiddle he'd borrowed from a neighbor and played 2 songs before his nerves got the better of him. When the sun dipped low and the shadows stretched long, Trute took Kenzie's hand and led her to the edge of the field, where the wire fence met the old stone wall. He stopped there, quiet. "I've been thinking," he said. Kenzie tilted her head. "That usually means trouble. I want to build something more, a second room, maybe 2. Sam's getting taller by the week, and Mara's been sleeping on that cot too long. Even if they don't stay, they've earned the choice." Kenzie rubbed her thumb along the edge of his palm. "We'd need more lumber and nails, maybe another team to haul it in. I've got some coin put aside, not much, but enough to start." She leaned against him, her shoulder fitting beneath his. "Then we'll start." That night, while the fire died down and the cabin filled with the scent of pine smoke and worn wood, Trute reached for her hand as they lay side by side. The window was cracked open just enough to let in the sound of frogs calling from the creek. "I never thought I'd have this," he said. "Land that doesn't feel borrowed, a roof that doesn't leak. You," Kenzie turned toward him, her fingers threading through his, "you do, and you always will." Weeks passed, then months. The second room went up slow, with help from a neighbor boy and a wagon load of pine planks traded for 2 cured hides and a dozen hens. Mara stitched curtains by hand, and Sam carved the doorframe with a pocket knife, notching his initials into the underside where no one would see but him. The garden yielded more than expected. Squash, peas, and enough root vegetables to carry them through winter with careful storage. Trute took to hunting farther north, returning with deer meat and stories of bear tracks near the gulch. Kenzie began drying herbs in bundles beneath the eaves, her hands always busy, her eyes softer now. One morning, as the first frost touched the edges of the pasture, Mara came to stand beside Kenzie at the well, her shawl pulled tight around her shoulders. "We're ready to move on," she said. Kenzie didn't answer right away. She drew up the bucket, poured half into the trough, and watched the steam rise as it met the cold air. "Where will you go?" "West. There's work near Rawlins, a cousin with a small place and no one to help on it." Kenzie nodded. "You'll be missed." Mara smiled. "You gave us more than safety. You gave us pause. That's harder to find." They left 3 days later. Sam hugged Troot like he meant it, then climbed into the wagon without a word. Mara pressed a folded square of cloth into Kenzie's hand, a bundle of dried mint and wild rose, tied with twine. "For your tea," she said. Kenzie watched the wagon disappear over the rise, then turned back to the house. Troot stood in the doorway, sleeves rolled, sawdust in his hair. "You all right?" he asked. Kenzie stepped into his arms. "We'll always have room if they need it again." They spent the winter tucked behind thick walls and warm quilts. Snow piled high against the eastern fence, and the chickens refused to lay for nearly a month. Troot read aloud by lamplight, while Kenzie mended socks and sorted seeds for spring. They passed the evenings without rush, without want. In early March, she woke before him, her hand resting over her belly, the weight of something new and quiet settling in. She didn't speak of it then. Not yet. She watched the way his chest rose and fell, the curve of his jaw slack with sleep, and let the knowledge bloom slow and bright inside her like the first crocus rising through snow. By April, she told him. He stood still a long time after she said it, one hand braced against the doorframe, the other pressed to his mouth like he wasn't sure how to hold the joy. "A child," he said finally, eyes wet. "Ours," she nodded. "I think it'll be a girl. I don't care what comes, so long as they have your spirit." As the seasons turned again, the land settled into a rhythm. The garden flourished, the fence stood straight, and the house held more than warmth, it held promise. Troot built a cradle by hand, smoothing each rail until it shone. Kenzie painted the shutters yellow. When the child came, it was late summer. The air smelled of dust and corn husks, and the wind had gone still for once. Kenzie bore down in pain and silence, her hand in Troot's, her jaw clenched. She did not cry out, she did not falter. And when the child arrived, red-faced and strong-lunged, Troot gathered her into his arms and whispered her name like a prayer. Grace. They raised her beneath that wide Wyoming sky. Taught her the names of every bird that nested in the eaves, every herb that could settle a fever, every story that stitched their lives together with thread too strong to break. They grew older, and the house grew fuller with laughter, with quiet, with the kind of love that didn't need proving. And no matter how long the winters, how deep the floods, how heavy the work, Kenzie and Troot never once looked back, because they had built something together out of ruin and silence and stubborn, steady care, and it was enough, more than enough. Forever.